What's up, guys? This is Coach Sampson again with another episode of Inside Iron Hills. Today, we got a ton of footage. We're going to start off with a couple of my new athletes. They've been rolling with me for about 2 months now, Brian Melamud and Gennaro Marzocca. Brian I worked with very briefly last preseason. He is a wrestler for Bergen Catholic, and he took 5th in the state tournament last year. And he reached out to me and said, you know what, I really need to get my conditioning up and I need to get stronger. And Gennaro came along for the ride, and Gennaro is actually an 8th grader going to Paramus Catholic to wrestle. He's a good friend of Brian, and Brian said, hey man, listen, if you want to get on the podium, you got to come and train in the off season. And we started off their day with some Zercher squats with the fat easy curl bar. This, I believe, is footage of week 4 of their training. They had done 2 weeks prior of squatting with kettlebells, and I felt like they were ready for some barbells. So the first variation that I like to introduce to newer guys that come through that aren't used to the barbell is the Zercher squat, just because it doesn't directly load the spine. And since the weight is loaded in their elbows, it really reinforces posture in the squat. The week prior, we actually used just a heavy sandbag, and this week I needed to load a little extra weight, so I used the easy curl bar. And we followed this up with some walking lunges and kettlebell swings. And these weren't perfect for a few weeks, but you know what? Sometimes you got to throw guys into the fire and let them adapt. Another key point that I want to touch on is the importance of having a good training partner, especially a training partner that's older than you and a little more experienced. I don't think Gennaro realizes this yet, but I think that Gennaro is going to be insanely successful at the next level, and I think part of it is because he has Brian setting an example for him along the way. It's important to have somebody to look up to and model yourself after. And on the flip side, it's important for Brian to have somebody to have to lead, because when you're a leader, now all that advice you give to the younger guys or the guys beneath you forces you to practice what you preach. And at Bergen Catholic, Brian was one of the younger guys. He wasn't one of the captains. So that was kind of a missing puzzle piece for Brian, because he had nobody that was going to hold him accountable. So the following week, I felt like Brian and Gennaro were finally ready for some straight bar work. I like to start our newer athletes, and by new, I mean have been training with specifically us for less than a year with the box squat, just because it's a little easier to gauge your depth and it reinforces good form and good habits. With that being said, the box squat is a little different than the free squat. I like my athletes to use it in a similar way that they use it at Westside Barbell. I like to have a slight pause on that box, and after free squatting for a couple weeks, it takes some time to get used to that. But it also takes a coach with a trained eye and a lot of attention to detail. The week prior, I told Gennaro that his grip was uneven on both sides, so we reinforced that this week. And I also am reinforcing that pause on that box this week. And you could see how much better these reps look compared to the week prior with that pause. I would like a little less of a bounce for Gennaro, but still an improvement. The week prior, I saw that Brian's elbows were a little too flared behind him. He still has some elbow flare here, but it's much better than the week prior. But the pauses are definitely improved. And with more time and more consistency, these will keep getting better and better. And right now what I want to do is just give you guys a little overview of how Brian and Gennaro's lower body day has been programmed for the past 6 weeks. This way you could get a better understanding of the Iron Hills training system. So for the first 2 weeks, we used a kettlebell squat with Brian and Gennaro. For weeks 3 and 4, we switched to a Zercher squat. The first week with a sandbag, second week with the easy curl bar, and then weeks 5 and 6, we finally introduced the barbell and had them start the box squat. And what you'll notice is that every 2 weeks, we actually rotated in a different variation of that squat, of the main movement. And what you would call this style of training is conjugate training. And I could probably have an hour-long video going into detail about what conjugate training is, But the very most basic principle of conjugate training is that you need to rotate the main movement variations every 1 to 3 weeks. So your main squat movement or your main bench movement or your main deadlift movement, these are going to get cycled around every 1 to 3 weeks. Some people might call this your core movements. Others might call it your max effort movements. But to make a long story short, this is the style of training that I will use with 90% of the athletes that I train. I don't use this for everybody because there are some outliers in there that need some specific types of training that are going to benefit them more than the conjugate training. But this is the system that I feel is going to work best for athletes in general. And that's for several reasons. Number one is the conjugate method fights against the law of accommodation. And what that means is when the body regularly experiences the same exercises and physical stressors, the training effect is reduced. With the conjugate method, athletes are systematically experiencing different exercises every 1 to 3 weeks. This means that the training stimulus is going to be the most bang for our buck. And another reason why I have a bias towards the conjugate method is that it balances the strengths and weaknesses of each athlete. So as we start rotating these new movement variations in, it kind of exposes each athlete individually where they're strong at and where they're weak at. So I kind of use it as an evaluation tool in real time when I have athletes come through so that I could expose a weakness and then make that weakness strong, which is, by the way, the easiest way to get somebody to become a better athlete. You'll really see what I mean later in this video. I'm going to show you guys a few examples. Another benefit of conjugate is that this is going to reduce joint stress because using the same movement too often can lead to training-induced overuse injuries. For example, using the same style squat over and over again for the course of 12 months will, yes, get an athlete stronger, but as Matt Wenning says, will put extra mileage on those joints. And one of my main goals always is longevity when it comes to training my athletes. The longer that they could last in their sport, the longer they could stay healthy and uninjured, the longer it is that they have an opportunity to become a champion. And that's an often overlooked aspect of sports performance training. We're not just trying to enhance performance. I'm also trying to keep these guys on the field or the mat or wherever it is that they compete longer. I want to reduce the chances of them getting hurt. Conjugate training also reduces the psychological fatigue associated with strength and conditioning. You got to remember, these kids are not powerlifters. They're not weightlifters. They're athletes. So this is not the first priority for them. They want to use this as a vehicle to enhance their performance and reduce their chances for injury. So mixing things up will also keep things interesting so that it doesn't become this mundane process where they don't want to show up. I want my guys coming in excited to train. So how often do I vary those main movements? So this is going to depend on how long an athlete's been training with us. So new athletes, and I consider a new athlete somebody that's been training with me for less than a year, they're going to use 3 to 5 main movement variations for, let's say, their bench, their squat, or their pull variation, aka the deadlift. And we'll stick with this movement variation for 2 to 4 weeks. And the reason why is because one of the pitfalls of conjugate training and varying your main movements is that newer athletes have a shorter period of time to get technical. And with me, technique always is going to supersede everything. So just because we're doing multiple movement variations, if the technique really sucks, what good is it? I see coaches use this method all the time, and each of these movement variations, the athletes are not performing them correctly. So this means they're wasting their time. They're not going to get what they really want out of the movement if it's not done right. And on top of that, the chances for injury is going to skyrocket with poor technique. So why not let these new guys settle with a variation for a month? You know, sometimes I'll even go over the 4 weeks. I'll go maybe 5 to 6 weeks with the same variation for a newer athlete. For experienced athletes, which for me, an experienced athlete is 1+ years training with us. And again, I want to emphasize training with us because just because you've been training since you're, maybe 13, 14 years old, you're now 17 years old, maybe you've been training for a few years, that doesn't necessarily mean you've been training correctly. And this happens all the time. I get kids that come in, tell me they've been training for 5 years of weights. I put them under a bar, tell them to do a squat, and it's a quarter squat, or their knees are caving in, and it just looks terrible. I hold guys to what I would call a collegiate standard or a professional standard, and if it's not looking up to my standard, you are not going to get lumped in with my what I would consider advanced athletes. You're going to have to spend some time with me under the bar and spend at least a year, learn how to do things the right way. So if you prove to me that you are a badass, you will have 6 to 8 main movement variations, and we'll probably rotate those in every 1 to 3 weeks. And even those groups sometimes have to take a step back because their technique has fallen off. And I'm going to use that to segue into the next segment here, where I'm going to show you guys some training footage of a pair of my advanced athletes, Nick Alvarado and Claudy Robinson. Both of these guys just wrapped up their senior year, and now they're both going on to play Division I football. And you can see here they are doing some box squats with chains. Good. One more under his chest. Walk it in. So what the chains do is it adds weight to the bar, but in the bottom of the movement, it's practically weightless. This is an example of what we call accommodating resistance. So in the bottom of the movement, which is where it's the hardest, it's lighter. And as we keep getting higher, the weight increases as those links come off of the floor. So this is a way that we vary our main movement and also teaches guys to grind through reps. So we have 315 pounds on the bar with those chains. So this is kind of interesting. So Nick is now handling more weight than he should be able to handle because at the top it's 423 pounds with those chains added. But as I explained before, in the bottom, that chain weight isn't on the bar. So in the bottom, it's 315, and as he creeps up in that squat, he's slowly adding weight as he gets higher and higher, and at the top, it's 423 pounds. This has tremendous effects on just about every single movement that you could throw these chains on. And now you can see Claudy taking this weight for a ride here. And what Claudy does great with the box squat is he has a slight pause in the bottom, which is the proper way to box squat, as I spoke about before. The following week, we actually changed up the bar. We changed the reps to sets of 1, and we actually added more chain weight onto the bar to vary things up. And here you can see his top set of the day. It was 330 bar weight, 144 in chains, and it was 474 at the top. And he moved that pretty damn fast. And Nick, I think, worked up to 454 at the top. I would like a little bit more of a pause on there, but listen, like I said, I hold guys to a high standard. Here is a clip of some of their accessory work. They took the infamous Fat Man kettlebell, which is 132 pounds. They swung that thing around a little bit for some extra posterior chain work. And that's the heaviest kettlebell that I have. It looks like the way that they're swinging this thing, it looks like I'm going to have to invest to get myself a heavier kettlebell. And as you can see here on our bench session, we threw in the chains as well. This is 108 pounds of chains, and at the top this is 343. And you can see Nick grind like hell through this rep, and on top of that, his form is pretty damn good too. So this is going to have a really great translation into his next 1 rep max with the bench press. Claudy worked up to 353 at the top plus the chains. I will say this. He has a super strong press here, but it's not very technical, and that affected him the following week when we tried to test 1 rep maxes in the bench press. Nick was rewarded when we test bench press because he was benching technical the whole way. I think this is a 25-pound PR for Nick, so now he's in the 300-pound plus bench press club. Claudy went for a 10-pound PR. He bench pressed the PR last time we tested the bench maxes. But he missed this today. And I'm going to show you the replay, and I'm going to show you why. In my opinion, I think that Claudy is really a 350-pound bench presser. But as you can see, wobbling back and forth, that's a telltale sign that his grip is uneven. And then also, bouncing off the chest, that's going to throw that bar path off, and he missed it. But you know what? We've since fixed those issues, and in the next episode, I'll show you guys how we did it. Now you're going to see some footage of Lou Paradiso. He is a senior in high school. He's moving on to wrestle for Johnson and Wales, which is one of the top Division III wrestling schools in the entire country. And he's doing his heavyweights actually with the dumbbells instead of the barbell, which is another interesting variation that I do with guys that are experienced training with us. So he does his heavy sets with the dumbbells, and then he does his rep work with barbells. And I've seen guys make pretty tremendous gains by doing this, and you would kind of call this reverse order workouts. And you can see him doing some accessory work here. We always hit guys with a ton of upper back work. You can see lat pull downs right here. The next clips you're going to see are of Joe Sciarrone headed to Cornell to wrestle, and Andre Morero, who's an 8th grader, headed to Seton Hall Prep, which is Joe Sciarrone's alma mater. And these guys were hitting a similar reverse workout order workout today. They were going heavy with the kettlebell split squats, and then they went into some light safety bar back squats. And here you can see Andre. Now, Andre, I've only been working with him at this point in this video maybe for 2 weeks. I really did a little experiment with him on this day. I wanted him to train with Joe Sciarrone, who is headed to Cornell, Division I wrestler. Been training with me since he's 12. He's now almost 18 years old. And I wanted to see if Andre could handle it. I wanted to see Andre step up to the plate, and maybe he could learn a few things along the way from Joe. And also along the way, I can learn some things about Andre. And I'm going to freeze frame this right now because I want to show you what I see. Maybe your standard coach that isn't paying attention to the small details here will see Andre squat with this bar and say, you know what, this kid's really strong. We should just implement him in with the advanced guys right now. But what I notice is that Andre's folding over a little bit, which means that his body wants to use his lower back and not use his quads. And that means that he has a little bit weaker quads. So maybe we got to bring those quads up. And I'm not saying this to pick on Andre. I'm saying this because even with guys that are what people would consider advanced, I can notice these small details and I could expose a weakness and get them better. Part of it is because of the conjugate system that I use, throwing guys in the fire. Right now I threw him in with that safety squat bar, and look what it did. It told me a story. It's telling me the answers. It's giving me clues on what I need to work on with Andre. And that's why you hire somebody like me that's an actual professional. In my opinion, if you bring Andre to any other strength and conditioning facility in this state, most of them are just going to keep stacking the weight on Andre because they think that he's an advanced athlete. But they don't see the little details because they just want to have fun with Andre. They want to do all the cool stuff, all the fun stuff, all the stuff that he's already good at. And what they fail to do is work on what he's weak at. And that's why we got guys that are middle schoolers. They have a lot of success. They come to the next level in high school, and they're never a champion. And coaches always want to point the finger at the kid, but they never want to point the thumb at themselves because, in my opinion, that's on the coaches. And I don't want that to happen to Andre. Andre is a 2-time middle school state champion. And I assure you, if he continues to train this way with me, he is going to be a champion at the high school level as well. And I think he's going to end up being a Division I wrestler just like Joe Sciarrone is. And here we could see the following week, Andre came in, and I switched him to a kettlebell front squat with a pause in the bottom, putting him in a position where his body's a little weaker at, but in the long run, this is going to carry over. And I'll say this until I'm blue in the face. Work on what you're weak at, and you'll become a better athlete. Parents seek me out to make their son better, not to give him a high five and tell him how great he is. They want to know what it's going to take to make him a champion. I'm paid to pinpoint the weakness and then attack it. The next athlete you're going to see here is another new athlete of mine, Nick Orejola. And I want to segue into what we were talking about before with attacking weaknesses. What happens when an athlete is injured or is currently rehabbing an injury, which Nick Orejola is experiencing right at this moment. So in the beginning of the previous wrestling season, Nick actually tore his meniscus. And he decided he wanted to keep competing and pushed himself all the way through districts and also into the region tournament where the only reason why he lost his last match was because literally his knee locked up and it just completely gave way. I was actually at this tournament watching another one of my wrestlers who you saw previously, Joe Sciarrone, compete in that same region tournament. Saw his father and said, "Hey, listen, after the season's over, get Nick hooked up with me and let's see what we could do so we could prevent this kind of thing from happening again." And at the beginning of the off season, I get a DM in my Instagram, and his father says, "Hey, listen, Nick just got done with meniscus surgery, and he wants to start training next week, even while he's rehabbing the knee." So what I basically do is I run him through some upper body workouts, let the PTs handle the knee until it's all done, and keep him in condition. Tyler Williams, another one of my new athletes, is going through the same exact thing. Tore his meniscus, never trained with me before, hit me up, said he wanted to train, and I'm just hitting up that upper body, keeping him in good condition until his knee's rehabbed. This way, Tyler has a smooth transition into his freshman year of college football at University of Maine. He's going to be attending there on scholarship next season, and he doesn't want to miss a step. So he's smart. He's working his upper body while he's rehabbing the lower body. And the last clips I'm going to show you today are of Nick Orejola. This is a couple weeks later. I paired him up with a teammate of his from Seton Hall Prep, Casey Farrell. And at this point in the offseason, their school actually started their offseason strength and conditioning program with a good friend of mine, Coach Max Ruiz, one of the best in the business. So what they're doing is they're coming in, and we're kind of filling in the gaps of the stuff that they aren't getting at school. So being a little more specific with their needs, still working that upper body. With Nick, you can see we're using some bands today for speed bench, and Casey's hitting some double kettlebell clean and press. So, yes, it's okay to train at school and to train privately with us. These two guys are on the Seton Hall Prep wrestling team, and I just happen to have a really close relationship with their strength and conditioning coach at school. So every week, I'm not only asking Casey and Nick what they did in the weight room at school, I'm also texting Max and saying, "Hey, Max, what did you guys do together? What do you think that their needs are?" And we're working together to get these guys as good as possible. So I don't see the strength and conditioning coaches at the school as my enemy. And when I have guys that come in that are from other schools that I might not necessarily know the strength and conditioning coach, I take a few minutes before they start their lift and ask them, "What did you guys do at school?" Because what good is it to repeat everything that we did during the school week? What we're going to do is we're going to fill in the gaps. So these guys might not be running a traditional conjugate training split, but at the end of the day, I need to do what's best for my athletes. And if that means, they come in and they get the accessory work that they didn't hit at school, that's what we're going to do. Because all that matters to me is for these guys to have success. I don't care if I'm the only coach that helped them. I don't need or want all the credit. So, guys, just some closing thoughts on this latest episode of Inside Iron Hills. I just wanted to address basically why I don't post too often on social media. And the number one reason why is because the only reason why I post anything is to basically market our in-person training. I make these videos so that athletes and parents could get a better idea of how the in-person training works and to get a better idea if they think it would be a good fit and they want to try it. So really, I'm not trying to compete with any of these internet gurus out there. I could really care less how many people like the video or share the video. And on top of that, I am not a slave to social media. So I always preach to the athletes all the time, get off your phones, spend a little more time focused on what's in front of you. And if I didn't do that myself, I would be pretty much a hypocrite. I will post, but I always want to make sure when I post, it's something of substance and not just filler. So until next time, guys, I don't know when I'm going to post again, when I'm going to edit up some more videos again. But thank you for watching. And if you are interested in Iron Hills training, you want to give it a try, please contact me. I'm going to put my phone number right below, and you could just text or call me, and we'll set up a free tryout session for your son to see if he's a good fit for Iron Hills. So, thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.